Ahoy there! Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another episode of the Destroyer Pilot's Manifesto, the series that aims to teach you everything you need to know about the various different destroyers in EVE Echoes. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Tech 10 Minmatar Republic Talwar II Assault. I have been having a lot of fun in this ship, like genuinely, this is some of the most fun I've had in a ship in a long time, and it's a destroyer, which is really quite exciting. Now for this video I do need to give a humongous thank you and shout out to FroztyJak, one of my good friends in Catskull who's been flying this ship an awful lot. I've bounced a few ideas off him, he's been giving me feedback and showing how he's been going crazy with this thing, and indeed the PvP section later on does feature some of his footage because I was just so darn impressed with how he's been doing. Anyway, we are going to be looking both at PvP and PvP in terms of how to fit this and the kind of things that it can use, and we'll talk about why this ship is actually a really solid choice for tech level 10 money making via ratting, but we'll come to that bit later on. So, without further ado, slap that like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the notification bell, and please do make sure it is set to all notifications. I've been getting a lot of messages from you folks recently saying, my goodness, I didn't realise I'd missed all these videos. Yeah, it's because YouTube only notifies you of certain videos, so when you ding that notification bell, tick all, and you'll get every single notification of a video when it goes live. That all said and done then, let's jump right in to talking about the Minmatar Republic Talwar II Assault. The Talwar II Assault is the Minmatar Republic's Tech Level 10 Assault 2 Destroyer variant. So if we head into the Minmatar Republic ship tree, across to the Destroyer branch and all the way to Tech Level 10, there it is there. And of course it is the Talwar II Assault. We have the Talwar Assault at Tech Level 7, this is the secondary version available at Tech Level 10. Now, a Talwar is actually a curved sword, or sabre, native to the Indian subcontinent, which looks nothing like the ship at all here, which personally I feel looks a lot like some kind of cool water beetle. I do like the look of the Talwar hull. It's not my favourite out there, but it's a pretty, robust looking hull. I do also love the Sebiesta skin. I've mentioned this before. The Sebiesta skin on the Tech 10 Minmatar Republic ships, I just love it. I love that sort of slate grey and black look to it, like some real badass covert ops destroyer. And I've just made myself sad by reminding myself that the Covert Ops Thrasher used to be a thing. Quick, let's have a look at the Angel Veteran skin. The fact that I can now make my ships look like they're part of the Angel Cartel always cheers me up and makes me happy. Now, anyway, let's move on to the attributes and fittings. So for the fitting profile here of the Talwar II Assault, the first thing you should spot is that this destroyer has 5 high slots. Now this gives it a really nice amount of damage. I do still believe that this could go up to 6 high slots. I am a personal believer that every single destroyer from tech level 5 upwards, and yes, I mean every single destroyer from tech level 5 upwards, deserves an additional high slot. That means that the destroyers that you get at tech level 5, like the fleet and navy issues, should all have 5 high slots, and by the time you hit the Talwar II Assault here, this should be running on 6 high slots. There are reasons for that, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. 5 high slots is a good start. I do think 6 would really help this ship to shine just that little bit more. We've got 3 mid slots, which gives us a decent amount of versatility in regards to things like propulsion jamming, electronic warfare, capacitor warfare, that kind of thing, all available there. We get a little bit of choice as to how we're going to fit the ship in regards to different scenarios there. 4 low slots, though, is not overly great, but it's a destroyer, that's to be expected. The 4 low slots means you really have to pick and choose carefully what you want to do in regards to tank, weapon upgrade modules, propulsion modules, all that kind of thing. You really have to pick a particular goal and roll with that. You don't get much space there to mess around with all kinds of different features. You have to pick a role and focus in on it. Now, we then have 3 combat rigs and 3 engineering rigs. I'm still calling them power grid rigs even now, and 66 megawatts of power grid output. Now, when I talked about the Tech 10 destroyers in the Tech 10 destroyer video, I was concerned that the Talwar II Assault's 66 megawatts wouldn't actually be all that much, and certainly now that I'm flying it, admittedly with full frigate and destroyer engineering all the way taken up to Expert 5, and yes, the frigate does matter because it reduces the amount of power grid that small modules will require to fit into the high slots, Basically, with those at full, I've got enough space to fit everything that I want to, but not enough left over that I can really consider going much into the way of oversizing things. That's kind of the key point here with the Talwar II Assault. The power grid is enough to fit anything you could want to, but it's not enough to really give you the space to play around with oversizing, like medium-sized afterburners or shield modules and things like that. You're just not really going to fit those in there. It is quite tight, not as tight as it could be, which I'm glad of. It's better than I thought it was, is what I'm trying to say. Now, on the subject of shipboard electronics, the capacitor bank on the Talwar II Assault is also not terrible. It's not great by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a destroyer, and I've kind of just resigned myself to the fact at this point that destroyers are just never going to have good capacitor, and that's an inherent design decision being made by NetEase. Now, ultimately, they do have a very aggressive recharge rate and a low capacitor recharge time, which is awesome. It's just the actual basic size of the capacitor tank that is the issue, and it means that if you were to fit like an oversized shield extender, you may find that you flatten your capacitor trying to activate it, if you can activate it at all, and certainly weapon upgrade modules, even the damage control unit, you notice when you activate that. It's something we have to learn to deal with destroyers, and we'll talk about that more later on. Defensively speaking, as far as destroyers go, the Talwar II Assault isn't bad at all. 10,180 overall EHP. Yeah, it's not a cruiser by any stretch of the imagination or anything larger than that, but it's still better than you'd get on a frigate. Most of this is in the shield, 3,101, but we do have a solid armor tank, 2,761. Structure lags behind at 2,445, but it's a Minmatar ship. That's what we expect. We expect decent shields, armor fairly close behind, and structure being the weakest of the tank. Caldari obviously are the big shields, Galente are the big structure, and Amar are the big armor tanks. Minmatar sort of is closer between the armor and the shield, and this does give us options. With the Talwar II Assault, you can armor tank this, you can shield tank it. People look at me strange when I suggest shield tanking a Minmatar ship, because the game says, oh, Minmatar are shield tank ships. There are very few Minmatar ships that actually explicitly get any bonus to a shield module, at which point you kind of have to look at the scenarios, and we'll talk about this later on, but there are situations where I do armor tank the Talwar II Assault, and there are situations where I shield tank it, but we'll discuss that later. Moving on then to maximum locked targets of 8. This is an unusual stat. I'm not complaining here, but it just strikes me as odd that the Talwar II Assault can lock onto more targets than my Hurricane battlecruiser can. It's not a complaint, I just don't understand why it needs so many. I'm happy it's got them though. And with a decent scan resolution too. 663 is nothing to write home about. It's not incredible. It's not like, you know, something like an Explorer frigate or an Interceptor even. But for a destroyer, again, that is a solid scan resolution. You can lock onto a target nice and quickly. If you want to go interceptor hunting, then of course you can just buff that up with additional targeting rigs to get that right the way up, so you can lock on very, very quickly. But for most purposes, that 663 starting point is very solid. We then get some truly astonishing stats here. The signature radius of 40 meters and the flight velocity of 341 meters per second. These are both incredible. That 40-meter signature radius is one of the smallest destroyers in the game, and it's almost frigate-sized. This means that the Talwar II Assault is actually pretty hard to hit. It takes a while to lock onto it for medium and large ships, anything with a lower scan resolution, and then when those weapons are firing, they will struggle to apply their damage because of how small that signature radius actually is. And the flight velocity of 341 meters per second native, again, that is a very swift flight velocity, for a destroyer at least. It's not as fast, obviously, as certain frigates, but it is right up there, and when we look at some of the Talwar II Assault's bonuses, this makes for a very fast ship. In fact, when we talk about speed and agility and that, it's only really the agility that starts to let it down, with 1.65 million kilograms of mass and an inertia modifier of 2.2. Now again, this isn't terrible. This is better than many other destroyers. It's still better than a cruiser, for crying out loud. But it's still not where I'd like to see it on a ship like the Talwar II Assault, in destroyers in general. I think destroyers have a bit more inertia than perhaps they need. I think that you could probably drop the Talwar II Assault's inertia down to about 1.9, maybe 2.0, somewhere around there, and it would still be an excellent ship. It would take it from a great ship to an absolutely terrifying one, and you know, I'm all for that. I think destroyers need that little bit of love right now. But hey, let's move on into the trait description, because this is where the Talwar II Assault really begins to shine and becomes one of my favourite things. Actually, I say that before we do because I keep missing it off here because it doesn't exist on the standard profile. Let's also talk about the fact that Talwar II Assault has a source radius of 139 meters, which is very, very small. It's not so small that people are going to really struggle to scan you, especially if they're trained or rigged for it. What it does mean is that it is very difficult for someone to scan you without your notice. What you have here is a ship that is tricky to scan, certainly, if they haven't trained into the scanning skills, if they haven't got rigs for it, if they're using a slightly, a lower meta level variant of a narrow resonance scanner, they might struggle to actually scan you down. And even if they do, you are almost guaranteed to get notified due to how small that source radius is. That is a key point for me for the Talwar II Assault. This makes it an excellent low-sec mission runner, because you can clear those missions quite comfortably, with the damage and the tank and that the Talwar II Assault can pull off, but you're a lot smaller than, say, a cruiser, a battle cruiser, or a battleship, which makes you much harder to scan, much harder to interrupt. You can just be there doing your thing, knowing that if anyone does scan you, you are much, much, much more likely to get notified than not. Anyway, looking at the trait descriptions then, the Talwar II Assault is of course a Talwar hull, which gives it that 25% increase to missile and torpedo velocity. That's not just the speed at which your missiles launch and thus smack into the targets, it's also the range. So you're getting a range bonus here to small missiles and torpedoes. Actually, to missiles and torpedoes, small or medium, heck, if you could fit larges onto this, that would benefit it. But we're not going to worry about that too much. We then have, of course, as an assault hull, the 5 seconds increase to damage control activation time. Now, I've been on the fence about damage controls for a long time, and I'm really starting to grow. They're really starting to grow on me. I used to look at them and think, why would you go for a damage control over a shield extender or armor plates? And then I realized armor plates slow you down, shield extenders increase your signature radius, and on a ship like the Talwar II Assault, you really don't want that. The fact that you get the passive resistance increase is nice, and then you can activate it for, in this case, 18 seconds of damage control activation time for massive amounts of resistance. I think it works out about 79% resistance boost on an all-round damage control unit. And it's 79% boost there for a full 18 seconds, which is just insane. It keeps the ship alive, means you can take an absolute beating whilst you initiate combat. As for the trainable skills, though, here on the Talwar II Assault, Advanced Small Missile Torpedo Operation gives us a 12.5% increase to small missile and torpedo damage, which, by a quick bit of maths in my head, is 62.5% increase across the board, 62.5% increase to the 5 high slots we have. Again, I do wish it was 6 high slots, but the 5 does the job. We then have Advanced Destroyer Command, giving a 15% reduction to warp drive signature radius penalty, which means when you activate a micro warp drive, you bloom your signature radius a lot smaller than you normally would. We'll talk about that later on in the fitting section. And we have an increase of 7.5% to stasis Weberfire optimal range. That's a really nice increase there. 37.5% additional range to stasis Weberfires. Basically, those are the stats there. The micro warp drive signature radius penalty, the stasis Weberfire optimal range, and the missile torpedo velocity. Those are the bonuses that really help the Talwar II Assault to shine in my eyes, and why I personally massively prefer it over the Corax II Assault. Finally, we have a 2% increase to flight velocity, 10% additional flight velocity on top of the 341 that we have native is a really nice boost. It makes this a surprisingly speedy little destroyer. So with that said and done then, that's a brief look at how the Talwar II Assault actually looks on paper. Let's have a look at fitting this, both in terms of PvE and PvP. I mentioned earlier that FroztyJak and I have been bouncing ideas back and forth, and Frosty has had some really awesome ideas when it comes to the Talwar II Assault. So this is actually one of the fits that he suggested, and it comes with a slew of references and recommendations. On screen now you should see I'm putting up loads of different kill mails. These have all been sent to me from FroztyJak using this fit. This is how terrifying this Talwar II Assault ship can be in terms of PvP, and it is taking down targets significantly above its pay grade in terms of size, which I'm just super impressed with. So how do we do this? Well, basically, it is a kiting or ranged fit. So of course, we're going to start off here with high slots as small missile launchers. Here, pithy C-types, because if you're using a Tech 10 ship, you darn well better be using Dead Space level loot if you can fit it into your ship, which we clearly can. The big advantage of this is that missile range, 23.69 kilometers. That is a good range for missiles. It keeps us outside of Weber fire range, it keeps us outside of Scram range. Yeah, we're probably still in Disruptor range, but for the most part, this allows us to use our speed to our advantage. We can keep outside of opponents' propulsion jamming for the most part, and apply damage from there. This then of course twins into the fact that the Predator Stasis Weber Fire is also getting an increase to its optimal range. Here you can see 20.35 kilometers, and I do strongly recommend the Predator here as you do want to clear that 20 kilometer margin. What you've now got are missiles and a Predator Stasis Weber Fire in excess of 20 kilometers, with a Predator Warp Disruptor there with 2 points of Warp Jammer to lock them down from up to 30 kilometers away, which means when you jump in on someone, you can lock them from 30, and as long as you're within 20 kilometers, you can use the Weber Fire to keep them at arm's range, keep them from closing the gap, whilst you kite away from them, and you'll still be applying full damage with your missiles, which frankly is just awesome. Now I then have an Explorer Narrow Resonance Scanner here. This is what I'm using, of course, to scan people down, jump in on them, and actually go and do PvP and piracy. If you are doing sort of more of a roam and you've got someone else who's scanning, this can be swapped out nicely for something either like another web if you really want to, you know, be absolutely certain there. You go for another disruptor to pin them down with 4 points of warp disruption. I also think that going for something like a target painter really helps here, because it just allows you to increase your damage against targets that little bit more and get a much nicer alpha strike off. But it's entirely up to you. Those three options all completely work. If we look into the low slots, the first one of course is a small micro warp drive, Gisty C-type, because again, Dead Space gear. What you'll notice here is that this actually gives us a beautiful flight velocity adjustment of 557%, so we are going considerably faster. I mean, our basic flight velocity, thanks to the skills I've got trained, plus the ship itself, is 588.91. We are then going 557% faster on top of that with the micro warp drive active, making for an incredibly speedy destroyer. You'll also notice though, because we have that signature radius increase adjustment for the micro warp drive, that drops our signature radius adjustment to only 103%. So our 40 meters signature radius only barely goes above 80 meters, which puts it at large cruiser, small battle cruiser, but going at the same speed that you'd expect from a frigate, which means this is extraordinarily difficult to hit as long as it can maintain that speed. Obviously you need to make sure that you are staying outside of scram range or you're going to lose that micro warp drive. We then have a small capacitor battery and a damage control unit. These twin together, just in case you're hit with a neutralizer. Before you can activate the damage control, you'll find the damage control does chew a lot of your capacitor, and when you activate it, the battery just ensures that 100% you're going to be able to do that, whilst keeping all of your electronic warfare on your target, hopefully allowing you to just get out of range of that with the micro warp drive nice and quickly. Now, what may throw you for a loop here is that there's a small armor repairer fitted to this, and as I said, ultimately a lot of people look at you weird when you put anything that's not shield on a Minmatar ship, and I don't see why. There is nothing on the Talwar II Assault that is directly benefited by having shield repairers or shield extenders. There's no additional shield extender time, there's no shield repairer, shield booster increases or things like that, so why not go for an armor repairer? And as FroztyJak said, the reason he does this is because it is much more capacitor friendly. If you're going for a kiting fit, you're not within Nosferatu range, and we've already talked about how small the capacitor can be for a destroyer. So hopefully with the damage control unit, with the kiting, you should be mainly keeping out of your opponent's range anyway, but if you're taking chip damage, it should be going obviously onto the armor. It's got nice big reps here. You can see 235 per rep. They're a little bit slower, but they are capacitor friendly. Looking here, you can see my capacitor is currently sitting at 3 minutes and 5 seconds on this fit. If I were to swap that to a shield booster, that drops right the way down to about 1 minute 5, and that is a big, big drop, especially since this will keep up quite nicely, as you'll see in the footage later. Anyway, the nano core here doesn't really matter. This is one of the new Monsoon 2 nano cores that I've plugged in here, and I've just gone for the straight missile damage rather than like the explosive or anything fancy, just gone straight for those. Looking at the rigs, in the engineering rigs I've gone for a polycarbon engine housing 3 twice, and an auxiliary thrusters 2, and there are 2 reasons I've done this. One, I think the top speed with that micro warp drive is sufficient anyway. I don't think going for 2 auxiliary thrusters is necessary. Secondarily, auxiliary thrusters are ridiculously expensive on the market. I don't get why these are so ludicrously expensive. Thirdly, having polycarbon engine housing means that I can reach the maximum speed that my micro warp drive would apply that significantly faster. It gives me that lower agility rating so I can reach that maximum speed and I can hold a tighter orbit, which is always useful just for making sure I stay outside of scram range. Now on the combat rig side of things, we've got 2 bay loading accelerators, typical DPS setup here, faster firing missiles, increases your damage output quite dramatically. That's the main purpose here. You can go for counterfaction catalysts if you want to go for an anti-interceptor fit, something where your alpha strike is the most important part, but for anything that is sort of more over time, then the bay loading accelerators do pull out the front. Finally then, I've gone for an auxiliary nanopump 3. This gives us a 30% increase to the armor repairers when those cycle, which just helps us keep alive a little bit longer. I don't recommend going for any of the ones that will increase the size of your tank. There's just not enough there really to work with. I do like this one because it means when I do have to activate the armor repairer, it heals up a good chunk in one go. Now, this is mainly a PvP fit, but it does actually work in PvE quite nicely as well. I've used this a lot. I will go and fly around and do a couple of like Lowsec or high-sec encounters whilst I'm out hunting, just to get some ISK in the meantime, and then you can use that Lowsec encounter as a safe space to jump back to if the fight starts to go a little bit pear-shaped, as an example. That's a great way of doing it. But anyway, I think we've talked about the fit enough. Let's actually showcase this one in action. Now, this footage was sent to me directly by FroztyJak himself, and I do apologise here for the discrepancy in visual quality between the rest of the video and this section. I don't know if it's him using a lower resolution on an on screen recorder, or whether it's his device running at lower settings, but either way, here he is in the Galente border zone scanning down some targets, and the first one that he scanned there was a Myrmidon. Now, if you are a small ship pilot and you spot something like a Myrmidon, that's usually a no-go. Drones are the bane of small ships, so any ship that is dedicated to their usage tends to be a problem for small pilots to go up against, because you're dealing with targets that can apply their damage much better to you than perhaps medium lasers, etc. can. So when he spots here a Harbinger prototype, that seems a much more interesting target. Now, normally, you'd look at something like a battle cruiser and say, taking out a battle cruiser in a destroyer on your own, are you insane? You can't speed tank the medium lasers. Well, that's why I wanted to showcase this bit of the video, this particular example. Now, here he arrives into the anomaly just before our Harbinger pilot here takes out the last ship in a wave, and that's unfortunate that he takes out that last ship, but hey, there we go. Frosty locks on. He starts to charge everything up, sends off his first volley there. While he's sending the first volley, he spots that there is a drone, and again, drones are the bane of small ship pilots. So the first thing that Frosty does is lock onto that drone, put a web of fire on it, he drops the missiles and gets ready to start firing those back onto that drone. We need to get rid of that drone quickly. That is going to start applying a lot of damage. And it's also interesting to note here that Frosty is running kind of a mix of the 2 fits that I'm showcasing in this video. He's got the PvP fit running, but using shield tanking. This was done before Frosty switched between the shield tank and the armor tank variant, and here obviously armor tanking would have done so much better, because it's just going to take all of the, going to lose the shields, and it's going to deal with those lasers quite comfortably. Now, he's finally dealt with the drone. We are now sitting at very low shields. Capacitor is going down surprisingly quickly. The battery has now run out. We're in danger now of going completely capacitor unstable. Well, it is capacitor unstable, and that shield is dropping fast. This now becomes a DPS race. You can see here that Frosty's missiles are hitting that Harbinger prototype for some significant damage. We're halfway through the armor. Certainly, the shields are just about holding for now, but then this is where things suddenly take a turn south. I don't know if, what exactly happens here to suddenly start taking the damage, if the Harbinger prototype suddenly spots that, oh, actually, maybe I should be firing a bit more onto this guy and he moves all his weapon systems, but in just a moment you'll see, there it is. We drop into shields, the armor starts taking damage, the capacitor's very low, and we're taking full damage now onto the armor. That is beginning to cut through the armor tank. The shields are gone. Frozty is adjusting his orbit here to get that little bit closer. He is desperately trying to burn down this Harbinger before his armor tank gives way. This is now kind of a lock-in, do or die. He's either going to finish this, or he's going to die trying. And it's going to be pretty close, or at least it looks that way until the next missile hits and just finishes it off. And there we are. That is a Talwar II Assault quite comfortably taking out a Harbinger prototype, and it can go after higher versions of that as well if you're using that armor tank. Again, as you'll have seen at the beginning of that fitting section, Frozty sent me a whole load of those different kill mails. Do check them out, and the proof is there in the pudding. This second fit is more PvE oriented. If you want to do some Lowsec encounters on your own without being interrupted by other people scanning you, thanks to the Talwar II Assault's very low source radius, you can kind of get on with this. And I've gone here for much higher damage output to help you break through the tank of some of those battleships, etc., just that little bit faster. If you do find that you're being scanned, this is not really a great fit for PvP. It doesn't lean into the Talwar II Assault's PvP bonuses, so if you do get the notification you're being scanned, I do recommend running through to a gate and then coming back later, scan down that site if you want to, and jump back in. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, this means that for the high slots here, we've gone for small torpedo launches. The bonus to missile and torpedo velocity does give these a missile range of 8.53. It's still very short, but it's now long enough that we can actually handle it with the fact that the Talwar II Assault is a little less agile than perhaps a frigate that you would otherwise put small torpedoes onto can handle. Now, obviously, this does increase the damage quite significantly as well. We've gone from, the high 400s to the high 600s cold by swapping from missiles to torpedoes. Of course, this is also helped by the fact that the battery has now disappeared and has been replaced with a ballistic control system. Again, very useful just for kicking up a little bit of extra damage when you need to. For tanking purposes, an adaptive invulnerability field followed by a small shield booster does help us just to reduce some of the incoming damage. Of course, we're going to be using an afterburner as well to speed tank, keeping our signature radius all the way down at that 40 meters. But anything that the speed tank does hit the speed tank, the adaptive invulnerability field will reduce that damage, and the shield booster then allows us to repair that back up. And with an energy Nosferatu, in this case of Ricolacus, that is allowing us to maintain capacitor stability as long as that is within range, which is a key point here. What I like to do with this is basically find the biggest target there and orbit it and try and stay close to that as a blood bag to drain, but you find that with the torpedoes you can't always do that. Just be aware that you need to pick your targets carefully and try and move through them quickly from A to B, because any time that you are further away from your target is a time that your capacitor is not being fully supported. And remember that destroyers have very small capacitors, so yeah, there's that. Obviously, by using an afterburner as well, we have lost that 25% reduction to the top of the capacitor bank, so we are on full capacitors here. Now, other than this, I've gone for an interruptive warp scrambler and a predator stasis webifier. This is just your basic sort of propulsion jamming, allows you to hold a target in place if it's that little bit faster. Dealing with some of the elites and the interceptors and things like that can sometimes prove a little bit difficult to hit. You can just whack the webifier and the scram on them to hold them in position and keep going. Some people do like to swap the scram for a second web. It's really up to you. Same as there are some folks I've seen who run a fit like this where they swap the adaptive invulnerability field for another ballistic control unit. Now for this, I'm using the same ship as before, so the rigs are still here. I've still got that auxiliary nano pump in play. I would keep the rigs pretty much the same, but for PvE, if you're dedicating to PvE, obviously that auxiliary nano pump is doing nothing for us right here. I would either swap that to one that is going to increase the amount of shield boost that you get per activation, or possibly even just a califaction catalyst for additional missile damage. Now this one, I'm going to showcase this in action because I've had a lot of fun with this. This is helping me clear through the Condor Pass, Concord Pass, very, very quickly. This is Debt Collection Expert, which is a Tech 10 Lowsec encounter worth 25 million ISK. What I like to do here with the Talwar II Assault is use the fact that I've got that low source radius to just get on with some of the Lowsec encounters, clear a load of the high-sec ones as well, which I can then use to get those various mission scrolls that I'll sell on the market. Now here we're on Wave 3 of this. Wave 3 of this, it's one of those gold named ones that has elite ships in it. You can see here we've got not got just the bodyguards, we've also got debtor ships, and those debtor ships are elite frigates, elite battleships, that kind of thing. And you'll see they've got some nasty little effects there, like additional warp scrambling. Now here we are in that third and final wave, and straight away we've taken out our first frigate, and the torpedoes you'll see just do an absolutely massive amount of damage. There's the Debtor Nemesis. This is the one I think that's doing 2 scram on me at the moment, and those torpedoes are just cutting through it like a hot knife through butter. That Nemesis goes down nice and quickly. I can then move on to the Imicus whilst locking onto the Catalyst, and perhaps it's the Catalyst then that's doing that scram effect. No real troubles here at all. I'm able to use the ballistic control system. I am speed tanking with the afterburner for the most part. I'm running with the capacitor on full and with the Nosferatu running. And I have got both the adaptive invulnerability field and the shield booster running. And you'll see that my shield is taking a bit of damage. We're down to about 78%. Capacitor's hovering around the 60% mark right now. Remember, we are capacitor stable as long as everything's in range. I'm not suffering any damage, and we've taken out enough ships there early on that my shield booster is now comfortably pulling me back up towards 100%. I've not taken so much damage that, you know, we've come anywhere close to hitting the armor tank. This is the big advantage of this fit, and you'll see that I cut through each of these ships one by one. Again, I tend to start with the small targets first of all, because they are obviously the ones that are more likely to be able to hit me. So I'm taking out the frigates, I'm taking out the destroyers, I'm getting rid of any of the E-War modules as a priority. If I can see that I am being scrammed, I want to get rid of that ship quickly in case I get the alert that someone is scanning me, and you'll see that I keep local open as well. That means if someone jumps into system, I can watch and see if that name sticks around for a bit of time, and if that name does stick around, it means they're probably hunting. And if they're hunting, well, I'm going to be waiting to see if I get that the area of space you're in has been scanned notification, and I've got the travel panel open on the right hand side so I can immediately jump through to a gate where I'll be nice and safe. I don't take risks. In this fit, I don't really take the risks. It's just not worth it for me. As I warp out, hopefully I can see them as they warp in, I can understand what ship they're flying, and if I know what ship they're flying, I might, know that if there's only them in system with me later and they scan me down again, I might be willing to take it, but I'm not going to take those risks early on. If I get that you're being scanned notification, I will jump straight to the gate and wait it out, then jump back into the combat and keep going. Now, in the time it's taken me to describe that, you can see I'm now on to the Brutix here. And yeah, okay, these do take a bit of punching to get through. If you're used to flying things like battle cruisers and battleships, then yeah, the lower DPS that I get out of the destroyer here it's gonna feel a bit slower. But it's not about how quickly you can do this, it's about how safely you can do this. It's not fully AFK by any stretch, but I'm able to clear these encounters comfortably. I can do all the high-sec ones, I can then do the low-sec ones that I need in order to get those mission scrolls, which I then sell on the market for a massive profit. Yeah, okay, you might sit there and say, oh yeah, but my battle cruisers and battleships earn ISK faster. Yeah, but then so many people are complaining that they keep losing their battleships and battlecruisers in these low-sec encounters because they keep being jumped by fleets. Here, it's difficult to get jumped. You can see I've got this Silence 2 here in local, and I'm just kind of zooming the camera out. I'm preparing in case he jumps in. I'm checking loot and that as well now. You can see there's the Elite Frigate Rex. I'm preparing in case I get that scan notification. I'm well aware that I can then jump to safety, but he leaves the system. I don't need to worry about it. He may have been trying to scan and just didn't have enough minimum scan radius to actually catch me. it's a pretty safe ship to go Lowsec ratting in, is my point. You're not going to be fully AFK, but you will be notified if someone is someone's dealing with you, and this is one of the harder missions in the game outside of the actual storyline encounters themselves. I haven't tested this fit in some of the special anomalies, like things like Inquisitors and Scouts, or some of the lower storylines. You might be able to do tech level 7 storylines with this, that kind of thing, but for the most part, the fact that I can earn those storyline scrolls along with a ton of ISK, and then sell those on the market for even more ISK, it's just a really nice little ship for that for me, and it's the security of that lower source radius is what allows that to happen. And there we have it, the Talwar II Assault in all its glory. I am loving this ship right now. It has literally cemented itself in my heart as my favourite destroyer currently available in EVE Echoes. The fact that I can fit this for PvE and go off and do Lowsec encounters without worrying about being scanned is just awesome. And the fact that I can then retrofit it for PvP and go and blow up all kinds of other ships, everything from frigates and destroyers through to cruisers and battle cruisers, on your own in one ship. Now yes, I know I've talked about how I still feel this thing does require some buffs, and I do think it should. I genuinely think that a couple of buffs are still in order for it. I think it gets that 6th high slot. I'd like it to have slightly more nimble agility, but as it stands, this is still one of the best destroyers in the game, and if you're wondering how I can sit there and sing its praises whilst still asking for buffs, that right there is my qualifier. It is the best destroyer in the game. It's still not quite where I think it should be, but in terms of other destroyers, this by far is, in my opinion, the best one. It's just amazing, and I hope you folks are enjoying it half as much as I am. So again, a big thank you and a shout out to FroztyJak for all his help and support in helping this video become a reality. It's nice to do a ship fitting video again after so long. I love this ship. I hope you guys enjoy it as well. Let me know how you're getting on with this and other destroyers in the comment section down below. Otherwise, folks, thanks for watching right the way to the end. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.